What if the United States ceased to exist? What would the world lose? Imagine waking up one morning to find that the United States of America no longer exists. Erased from maps, erased from history books, vanished from the world of technology. This wouldn't just be a political shift, it would be a monumental turning point in world history. The disappearance of the US wouldn't simply mean the loss of one country. It would signify the collapse of one of the pillars of modern civilization. So, what exactly would the world lose in such a scenario? What would humanity be deprived of? Which milestones might never have happened? Let's first take a brief look at the history of the United States and then explore how its absence would reshape the world. A brief history of the United States. In 1776, when 13 British colonies declared their independence, no one could have predicted that this small union would one day become the most powerful nation on Earth. Following the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, the U.S. rapidly expanded across the continent throughout the 19th century. By the 20th century, it had taken an active role into world wars and emerged as a global superpower. During the Cold War, the U.S. stood toe-to-toe with the Soviet Union, influencing the world with its cultural, technological, and military might. Be why the 21st century, America had become more than just a country, it became an idea. It came to represent freedom, entrepreneurship, and individual rights. But if the United States had never existed, who would have carried these ideals forward? A technological giant. What if the US had never existed? Much of the technology that sustains the modern world has its roots in the United States. The foundation of the internet was laid in 1969 through ARPANET, a project by the US Department of Defense. Tech giants like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple, all American creations, now serve billions of users globally. If the US had never existed, the internet might have developed much later or in a radically different form. The personal computer revolution might never have happened, smartphones might never have become so widespread, private space ventures like SpaceX may have never emerged, visionaries like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and Bill Gates might never have been born. In short, the world of technology could have lagged decades behind its current state. Cultural impact. A world without Hollywood and American pop culture. One of the US's biggest exports is culture. Hollywood films, Netflix series, rap, jazz, rock and roll, all are American-born influences that have spread worldwide. Many of the cinematic techniques, storytelling structures, and even the concept of the superhero originate from American creativity. If the US had never existed, the Marvel and DC universes would never have been created. The global film industry might have developed in a very different, perhaps less advanced, direction. Iconic brands like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and Nike might never have existed. The global entertainment industry, filled with NBA and NFL stars and Hollywood icons, would have looked vastly different. This wouldn't just be a gap, it would mean the absence of a shared global cultural memory. Scientific contributions. Where would science be without the US? The United States has won more Nobel Prizes than any other country. With its massive research funding and world-renowned universities, the US stands at the heart of global science. NASA initiated the space race and took the first steps toward Mars. If the US had never existed, the first humans on the moon might have been Soviet, but the event may not have had the same global impact. Discoveries in DNA, nuclear physics, and genetic engineering might have taken much longer. Progress in vaccines, biotechnology, and artificial intelligence could have been significantly delayed. Geopolitical balance. A lost superpower. In the 20th century especially, the US played a stabilizing role in global politics. It counterbalanced the Soviet Union during the Cold War, led NATO in defending Europe, and controversial as they were, its interventions in the Gulf War, Afghanistan, and Iraq shaped the global order. If the US had never existed, the Soviet Union might have lasted much longer, China might have risen far earlier and without constraint, institutions like the European Union and NATO might never have formed, the world could have devolved into a chaotic multipolar system rather than a relatively stable unipolar one. The absence of the American economy. Would the global financial system collapse? The United States is not just a country, it is a cornerstone of the global economy. The US dollar is the most widely used currency in international trade. The New York Stock Exchange (NYSE) is the beating heart of global investment. American-based corporations conduct trillions of dollars in transactions worldwide. If the US had never existed, even if another currency had replaced the dollar, the transition would have been painful and uncertain. Global institutions like the IMF and the World Bank might have taken on a completely different form or might never have emerged at all. Without Wall Street, stock markets may never have developed into their current form. The global economy might have remained fragmented and regional rather than interconnected. Entrepreneurial culture and ecosystems like Silicon Valley might never have materialized. In short, the presence of the U.S. economy acts as a domino piece that affects not just its own citizens, but nations across the globe. If that domino were to fall, it could trigger a chain reaction of economic chaos. Human rights and freedoms. What if the U.S. Constitution never existed? The U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights have inspired modern democracies around the world. Core liberties, freedom of the press, speech, religion, and conscience spread globally as pillars of the American legal system. If the U.S. had never existed, these freedoms might have been recognized much later or not at all in certain countries. The civil rights movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., might never have happened. The very concept of a land of liberty might never have taken root. People around the world striving for freedom might have faced their struggles in isolation. While the United States can certainly be criticized for its policies, its existence has provided a global model for human rights and individual freedoms. Education, a gateway to knowledge that might never have opened. Many of the world's top-ranked universities are located in the United States: Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Yale, Princeton. Every year, thousands of international students study there and return to their home countries with knowledge and experience. If the U.S. had never existed, global academic collaboration would have been severely hindered. Scientific publications would have had to emerge from different regions, but this shift would have taken time. Institutions focused on high-tech, cutting-edge education might not have spread around the world. In essence, the absence of the U.S. would create not only a void in its own education system, but a global hunger for knowledge affecting future generations worldwide. Military power. How would the balance of power shift? The United States military is considered the largest and most advanced in the world. As the main supporter of NATO, the U.S. maintains around 800 military bases abroad. This global military presence acts not only as a force of war but as a stabilizing influence. If the U.S. had never existed, nations vulnerable to powers like China and Russia might have taken more aggressive measures for survival. Power vacuums in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa could have plunged regions into chaos. Nuclear deterrence might have fallen into very different hands, increasing the risk of global instability, though often criticized for its interventions. The U.S. military serves as a balancing superpower on the global stage. Climate, nature, and scientific warnings, a weaker environmental fight. While the U.S. is often criticized for pollution and overconsumption, it is also home to many of the most vital environmental warnings and green technologies. NASA's climate research, carbon emissions tracking, and eco-innovation all have American origins. If the U.S. had never existed, much of the climate data the world relies on would be missing. Progress in renewable energy technologies would likely have been delayed. The electric vehicle revolution led by companies like Tesla might never have happened. California-based environmental startups might never have set global green technology standards. As a result, humanity might be far more vulnerable in the fight against climate change. Social movements and online activism. Where would it all begin? The US's culture of free expression has laid the foundation for social media activism. Movements like the George Floyd protests resonated across the globe, sparking international conversations about racism and justice. If the US had never existed, platforms like Twitter, Instagram might never have been created. Hashtag activism might not have spread on a global scale. Social justice movements would likely have remained local, without the powerful global solidarity we see today. Without the U.S. in health and medicine, the United States has led numerous medical revolutions. Its advanced laboratory infrastructure, massive funding for medical research, and pharmaceutical giants with global reach have played a central role in the evolution of modern medicine. During the pandemic, companies like Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson became symbols of hope not just for America, but for the entire world. If the U.S. had never existed, Myrna vaccine technology might not have developed so quickly. Groundbreaking treatments from heart surgery to cancer therapies could have been delayed. Coordinating a global response to health crises would have been far more difficult. Without regulatory bodies like the FDA, international medical standards might have had critical gaps. In short, the U.S. has contributed not only to economic and technological progress, but also to global health and quality of life. What would happen to the space race without America? Without the U.S., the space race likely would have fallen under the sole control of the Soviet Union. Putting a human on the moon was more than a show of power, it was the pinnacle of scientific achievement. But without NASA, the drive behind this competition might have been lost. If the US had never existed, landing on the moon might have happened much later or not at all. Plans to send humans to Mars would be far behind where they are now. Major projects like the Hubble Space Telescope or the James Webb Telescope might never have been launched. Private space companies like Elon Musk's SpaceX or Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin might not have emerged. The desire to explore space has been propelled by visionary Americans and massive investments. Without the US, the space race might have slowed dramatically or taken a completely different path. A nation of immigrants, the end of a dream. Throughout history, the US has represented a land of opportunity for millions. War refugees, economic migrants, oppressed scholars, artists, and academics have built new lives in America if the US had never existed. Many of these people might have had to give up their hopes for freedom, peace, and prosperity. Scientists like Einstein may have fled to other countries, but without the same support or potential, Hollywood stars, Silicon Valley founders, and global music icons may never have realized their potential elsewhere. The absence of the United States would be more than a geographic loss. It would mean the loss of a symbol, the land of dreams. What would the world lose without America? Of course, the US has its critics. Its military interventions, aggressive foreign policies, and environmental impact are valid points of debate. But despite all the controversies, a world without the United States might be a more chaotic, less secure, and slower developing place. Who would take America's place? If the US didn't exist, who would fill its role? China? Europe? Or would a new power rise? This is a speculative but thought-provoking question. China's economic and technological rise continues, and the EU offers balance and diplomacy. But none of these powers yet match the diversity, dynamism, and global magnetism that the US has long provided. Conclusion: more than just a country. The absence of the United States would not simply mean the disappearance of 50 states, 330 million people, or a flag. It would mean erasing a major chapter from humanity's development story over the past 2 centuries. From technology to art, politics to education, space to health, America has left a mark on nearly every field. This scenario serves as a reminder, no matter how controversial, some institutions have become part of humanity's shared legacy. And the US, with all its flaws, may be one of the most powerful pieces of that legacy.